Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to The Nonprofit Coach with Ted Hart, the most listened to radio show in the nonprofit sector, dedicated to helping your charity succeed. It's no secret that combining online and offline techniques is the key to fundraising success, and practical nonprofit management advice is what you need. The Nonprofit Coach with Ted Hart is the perfect landing point to learn from experts around the world who provide advice you can use. Ted Hart is without a doubt one of the foremost nonprofit thought leaders. Also a successful author, his books range from successful online fundraising to expert nonprofit management. Guests on the Nonprofit Coach are leaders in their field who share their insider tips and trade secrets in a conversational style both the experienced and novice will benefit from. Ted lectures around the world, but now he's here for you. From the latest in charity news, technology, fundraising, and social networking, Ted and his guests help you and your organization move to greater levels of efficiency and fundraising success. This is a live call-in show. Add your voice by calling 347-324-3080. After the show, you can find all our podcasts at tedhart.com. Click on Radio. Don't forget to dial 347-324-3080. Now, welcome the host of the Nonprofit Coach, Ted Hart.
And welcome here to the latest edition of the Nonprofit Coach. Thank you so much for joining us today. Here on the Nonprofit Coach, as always, you can join us as the announcer mentioned. You can join us online. You can ask questions over in the chat room. I see a few folks over in the chat room. You can ask questions there. You can also call in, as the announcer said, at 347-324-3080, or you can email us today at tedhart@tedhart.com. As always, here on the Nonprofit Coach, we start the show with Page One News. I think it's impossible to start the show today by not mentioning the obvious, and that is big changes are likely afoot for the nonprofit sector under the new Trump administration. There's an article today in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that we will be tweeting out after today's show. The charity officials are preparing for hard-charging Republican leadership that vow change. At stake are tax deductions and tax breaks that encourage billions of dollars in giving, and legal limits on nonprofits' political activities for starters. So it's unclear at this point, as the article points out, exactly what direction. There's conflicting notices in terms of whether or not the president-elect is going to seek to cap all deductions, which, of course, suggests that there will be a reduction in charitable giving in the United States if that were the case. But they've also suggested that they would not put a cap on that, and instead with tax deductions or rate reductions that could erode some of the effect of donations being made to nonprofits. So unclear at this point. I think one important point that is made in some of the articles that have been written recently is that whatever change might take place is going to take time to get through Congress. So it's not clear whether or not the changes would necessarily take place in 2017 or might take place in 2018. Certainly things like block grants, contributions, and support for nonprofit organizations, those seem at stake, and unknown but likely to be big changes to the tax code. It's unclear what the effect of that will be. Today on the show we have as our Page 2 expert, Penelope Burk will be with us. She's going to share information from the 2016 Burk Donor Survey report. But next up here on the Nonprofit Coach, I want to bring in, first of all, Jen Bokoff is here with us. She's the Director of Knowledge Services at the Foundation Center. But Jen, you've got a couple of friends with you and some important topics to share. So hello, first of all, to Jen Bokoff. Hello.
Hi, Ted. Thanks for having us.
I'm going to bring in your colleagues, Maya Winkelstein, who is from Open Road Alliance, and Gabby Fitz, who is the Foundation Center's Issue Lab service. And Jen, you're going to walk us through what all of you are up to today with today's Foundation Center Minute.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ted. And just to maybe transition from your very appropriate introduction, I think we've been talking a lot at Foundation Center about how, especially in light of the election, our work is more important than ever, where we want people to have a place where they can come to really understand how to access resources that are available to them and equip themselves with knowledge that they need to advocate for different issue areas that they care about and to have conversations that are grounded in research and data. And so that's kind of Foundation Center's position on the recent election, and I think always. And so just want to underscore that most of our resources are free and easily available. And so what we're going to talk about today is one example of a project that we've pieced together to inform people on a topic. And this topic is about risk and risk management in philanthropy. So if you want to follow along for the next couple of minutes at home while you listen, the website, and we'll say it again at the end, is riskandphilanthropy.issuelab.org. Riskandphilanthropy.issuelab.org.
We're tweeting that out. We're tweeting that out right now for anyone who didn't get that. So follow us, twitter.com/Ted Hart, and you'll have that link.
Thanks, Ted. So this Risk and Philanthropy collection, it's one of the special collections on Issue Lab, again, freely available. And the idea behind it was to see what the field, what the sector is actually talking about when they talk about risk and risk management. And so we partnered with Open Road Alliance, which is where Maya's representing, on this project. And Gabi from our Issue Lab team really led a lot of the research. So what we're hoping to do is I'm going to actually pass the microphone to Gabi, who really led this research so that she can share a little bit about what we found and also what we didn't find, and maybe put that in the context of why open knowledge matters. And then we'll turn it over to Maya so that she can give us a little bit more on the broader context of how Open Road Alliance is shaping the conversation around risk and risk management in philanthropy and why this collection was a logical starting place. And we'll make sure to connect that to how it matters to you and what you can do with it as well. So Gabi, let me turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jen. And thanks again, Ted, for having us today. I really just want to take a couple minutes to talk a little bit about this collection in particular and sort of what we hope to accomplish always with these kinds of collections. We worked closely with Open Road Alliance and with Maya on trying to answer a question that they were asking, which was, how is philanthropy even talking about risk? It can seem at times like there's a lot of talk about risk, actually. But we have, a remarkable body of evidence and a remarkably documented body of work, really, from nonprofits and foundations that takes the form of lessons learned and case studies and blog posts and evaluations and white papers. It's work that we're surrounded by in many ways, but it's also spread far and wide. And so sometimes it's hard to answer a question like, well, what do we really know about risk? What's being talked about when we talk about risk? And how do we talk about risk in philanthropy? So what we did with the support and collaboration of Open Road Alliance was really what we call an evidence scan. And so we went out, and after sort of honing the research question, what do we mean by risk? What kinds of work do we want to include? What sorts of voices do we want to make sure we're including here? We went out and really scanned the existing knowledge base. So that meant going, to some of the larger philanthropy schools. It meant going to the Issue Lab collection itself, which is an open access collection of the literature produced by nonprofits and foundations. And it meant going to the websites of organizations and foundations who had either published something about risk or had received a grant related to risk management. So that search, that wide search, resulted in about 70 publications, all of which we then poured through to try and understand what are the patterns and themes in how philanthropy is addressing this question of risk. And, what we found was it is being talked about, actually, and there's a lot of discourse about risk, but that discourse kind of groups into a couple of important categories. And unfortunately, the smallest amount of discussion is happening around really how can nonprofits and foundations in particular manage risk on the ground. So there's a lot of discourse at the level that's probably familiar to most listeners and to you as well, Ted, that's sort of at the level of the kind of unique role that philanthropy plays and its ability to take quote-unquote big risks. So a lot of blog posts about that, a lot of case studies, a lot of sort of, be bold, take risks, fail fast, a sort of rhetoric. But unfortunately, it wasn't matched with a lot of on-the-ground counsel about how to actually mitigate and manage risk. There is an interesting sort of third body of evidence that we found and discussion that we found that was around really framing risk in terms of return on investment, so really the social investment literature. But again, for risk that's maybe harder to quantify, programmatic risk, reputational risk, again, a real shortage of literature on that topic. So, I'm going to hand it over to Maya in a second, but I think, we learned these kind of evidence scans do a couple things for us. The first is that they really show us where the gaps are. They show us where we need to learn more. That literature may also exist, or that discussion may exist, but it's not being shared openly. And so the gap may be that we need to share it more openly, what we're learning about risk. It may be being produced, but we can't find it. And if it's not being produced, I think there's a real need for it, especially in the kinds of changing conditions and environments that you open the show with. And then the last thing I just want to say is that, I think this work of stopping and saying, before we proceed, what do we already know as a sector? We're a sector that's so rich in knowledge, and taking a moment to make sure that we find what's already out there. So I'm going to hand it over to Maya to share a little bit of her and Open Road's perspective on where to go from here.
Before you start, Maya, if you don't mind, before you start, if I can just make a couple of comments for our listeners. First of all, this is really brilliant and I think very, very timely, as you mentioned, because certainly risk in philanthropy is a topic that not only managers are looking at, but I just did a quick search for what you have in there for board of directors, who obviously have a responsibility to be looking at risk and managing appropriately. And there are 9 studies that are in your scan here, specifically mentioning the role of board of directors. So I think that's important. And Maya, if you can also, just in the couple of minutes that you have, put this in context of something else important that's going on today, and that's Giving Tuesday.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Ted. So I think that, the larger context from Open Road Alliance, and we're a private foundation that actually is focused exclusively on this topic of risk in philanthropy. And for us, partnering with Foundation Center to get this collection out was really about testing one of our sort of core findings that we have found through our own work, which is that fundamentally foundations love to talk about taking risk, and our sector likes to talk about taking risk, but nobody's actually doing it. And this collection really underscored that, along with other research that we found, even survey research and other research we've conducted independently. And I think your point about the board is so key, because one of the things that we found and that this collection I think really highlights is that this conversation about risk is really at its nascent stage for our sector. It's sort of like where the conversation around impact was 15 years ago, right? Everybody is using that word, but nobody really knows what it means, and we don't really have a good way to measure it, and we don't really have agreement on what the nuanced difference of definitions and frameworks are. So I'm really hopeful that this collection is going to help us to start bringing some of that structure to this topic. And in terms of Giving Tuesday, I think it's really relevant, and especially beyond Giving Tuesday and even into this holiday season and the traditional charity season. One of the things that we hear every year as a refrain coming into this charitable season is, be careful where you're giving, right? Check out, do your due diligence, research, and that conversation, the sort of charity watchdog conversation, comes along with then calls from the sector saying, yes, be careful about who you're giving, but don't look at overhead. Right, and don't worry about starvation cycle and these other things. And one of the interesting things that I've found is that many of those conversations really do come back to risk. Because when we're investing in philanthropy, it's really no different than investing our money anywhere else in the world. And we know that the number one rule of investing is that there's risk and reward. And if you don't know what your risk level is, if you don't know if you're a 1 or a 5 on that risk scale, you can't choose your investment. And there's no such thing as zero risk. And so I think one of the things that's missing from this conversation overall is that risk question, and hopefully this will help give some answers.
Absolutely, and I really applaud this gathering of information that you brought together, because it's not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's trying to give context to work that has come before. And I would say that for any of our listeners today, if you're not taking risk, if you're not managing risk, you're not working hard enough in the nonprofit sector, because there are so many needs and so many people who are in want. You need to look further. You need to work harder. But I think what you're giving us here in this issue lab, and we did tweet that out today, is a roadmap to where is some of the best thinking in this area, where is some of the work that's come before us. Particularly, again, on this show, we really try to focus on the smaller nonprofits that don't have access necessarily to, big expensive consultants that, can help them with risk management. Oftentimes, they're small staffs that have to make a go of it with whatever they have. And now what the Foundation Center has done is sort of done that homework for you, brought all of that together in one easy searchable database. And I really want to applaud all of you for the work that you've done.
Thank you, Ted. And just even just draw one more example from that, in the collection there are actually some articles with actual downloadable tools that nonprofits, small or large, can take to conduct a risk assessment. So to your point, people don't have to recreate the wheel and can leverage what's already been done.
That's great, and there's a really handy drop-down menu that you can go directly to certain categories that could be very important to you. We need to move on to our Page 2 expert today. So again, thank you, Jen Bokoff, Director of Knowledge Services of Foundation Center, for bringing us Gabby Fitz, the Foundation Center's Issue Lab service, and Maya Winkelstein, who is your partner at Open Road Alliance. Ladies, thank you so much for coming on the show today and giving us access to this very important service.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks for having us.
Take care, everyone. And next up, of course, is Page 2. It is my pleasure to welcome back here to the Nonprofit Coach. And for those of you who are interested, we're also streaming live over on Facebook. You can join us at facebook.com/Ted Hart. Penelope Burk is the president of Cygnus Applied Research. She's an author, researcher, and mentor who is celebrated for some of the most important innovations in modern-day fundraising. In 2000, Penelope introduced the not-for-profit industry to the concept of donor-centered fundraising, transforming the way that the sector communicates with donors and bringing fundraising in line with donor needs. And I think even more importantly is the focus that, Penelope, you have brought to data, the importance of making decisions based on data and not just sort of fundraising from the gut. And your show here on the Nonprofit Coach each year is one of the most popular. So welcome back here to the Nonprofit Coach, Penelope Burk.
Ted, thanks. It's great to be on your show again this year. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the research that you do. I know that this is not necessarily easy every year because it is so comprehensive. So just for some of our newer listeners, I know the folks who have been with us for a while and have listened to your podcasts over the years, they're already familiar with how you put the survey together. But you involve over 27,000 donors. How do you get so many donors involved in the study, and can you give us sort of the basics of what is the Burk Donor Survey?
Sure. Well, getting the numbers is pretty challenging until we developed a process of working with partners. So this year, we reached out to not-for-profits all around the U.S. and Canada. So we do 2 simultaneous surveys in both countries and produce 2 separate reports. A lot of the findings are similar, but there are some differences for sure. So in the American survey, we had 104 not-for-profit partners, and they reached out to over 1.8 million donors and asked them to go online and complete our anonymous survey. And the survey is quite long. There's 146 questions in this year's survey, although no respondent had to answer every single question. Still, it's not uncommon for them to be inside the survey for 30 to 45 minutes, and they stay and they answer those questions. So the other reason our research study is so successful, besides the fact that we have these wonderful partners, many of whom come back year after year, is donors themselves. Donors who support charitable organizations want them to be as successful as possible. They're very philanthropy is very important to them, and so they will spend an inordinately long time in a research study if they feel that the results can help the charitable organizations they support. And I think the third thing is we do something quite unusual. We provide all donors who want it, who come into the survey, with a summary of the results absolutely free. So, and usually, if for the fundraisers who are out there listening who are donors themselves, they will know that donors are often solicited for their opinions in capital campaign feasibility studies and other research, but they very seldom know what the results of their efforts were. But we want to make sure donors do know, because in most cases, most questions we ask, the response rates are extraordinarily high in one direction or another, whereas donors often feel that they're doing their philanthropy independently. They don't know what other donors think, and they don't realize that more often than not, they are part of a vast majority who are thinking the same way.
Mm-hmm. And that's very important for the charities and the planning. One of the things that I think has really distinguished your study year over year is that you've been able to identify trends, both in identifying what is happening in the marketplace, but also to validate trends. And I remember you were one, if not the first, one of the first to really be identifying that sort of our senior surfers online, our older donors that are online, are in fact online, giving online, and that while that might be for some charities a population that might be forgotten or not focused on, you said no, hold on. They are there and they're growing, and it's important, and they have a particular profile. So what is happening? What are the trends that you are seeing that's coming out of not only the 2016 Burk Donor Survey, but again, you have that longitudinal long-term view?
We do, and that's what makes this particularly fun for me. We've been doing the Burk Donor Survey since 2009 now, and fundraisers who were in the business back then know how tough it was in that year it was the hardest year post-recession for fundraisers, and initially
it was also
in
somewhat
2009.
Controversial. Penelope, it was also somewhat controversial at that point because people were saying, well, donors won't really participate, we won't really learn anything, and you proved everybody wrong.
It was a huge response, and donors were looking for an opportunity to tell charitable organizations how they felt, and also to send a message that year, which is incredibly poignant, that in spite of what was happening to them personally, business-wise, and in spite of what was happening to older donors regarding the investment loss that they were experiencing, they would find, the majority said they'd find a way somehow to keep supporting charitable organizations at least the same level that they had given at the previous year, even if they had to pull the money out of the grocery budget. So it was an amazing collection of information in 2009. I had not intended to do another survey, but it was so interesting that I wanted to follow up the next year. And then that survey brought forward even more information, and now, of course, we just do it annually because every year I'm blown away by the number of donors we get, what they have to say, and I guess most important for your listeners, the accuracy of their findings. So we're
right, and we would be
questions.
terribly disappointed if you didn't do the research because of what we learned. You mentioned back in 2009, sort of the starting point, but also a very pivotal year for proving that the Burk donor survey was looking at something unique and learning something unique. Can you tell us, is the economy still affecting donors' giving decisions?
Not nearly as much, and although I'll have to say it depends on where donors live. So, for example, in Texas, where there's oil dependency, of course, and the price of oil has fallen dramatically, many more donors who live in Texas say that they had to control their spending on philanthropy or give less. And if we compare that with other states, there was a significant difference. So, but if I look overall at the national findings, from the point of view of whether or not the economy impacts philanthropy, we had the best possible finding this year. Only 18% of all donors say they gave less last year due to economic circumstances, the lowest since we started surveying. If we go back to that infamous 2009 survey, that year 59% of donors said they gave less because of the economy. So it's an incredibly dramatic difference. But the economy affects donors in two ways. Some give less because they're hurting and they feel they have to pull back in their giving, but others give more, even if they are personally hurting, to make sure that the charities that they really believe in are not, and especially the people that those charitable organizations help, are not hurt any further. And so they are an amazing group. And in this current year's survey, 11% of donors said they gave more because of a poor economy.
And thinking again about the economy, you mentioned regional differences, particularly pulling out Texas and sort of the drop in oil and how that's affected people. What other regional differences are you seeing in this this particular survey that maybe is different from other years or was particularly important to you?
You know, it's funny, we look at that because we do ask everybody where they live. And we run all the demographics and the answers to questions on how much donors gave last year and are planning to give this year. And we found that was the only area where region did make a difference. But there were other demographic questions that were hugely impactful on survey results. And at the top of the list was age. There are dramatic differences. If I look at just three age groups, we could cut it all kinds of ways, but if I look only at donors, let's say over the age of 70, middle-aged donors between 40 and 69, and donors under 40, there are dramatic differences in how much they're giving, how they prefer to give, where they think their future is headed in philanthropy, and it's really interesting. And I'd say that we're focusing less attention on the youngest donors, particularly donors under the age of 35, mostly because their gift values are just a small fraction of what middle-aged donors in similar economic circumstances are giving. So in our analysis this year, our young donors who are employed, when I compared employed young donors under 35 with employed middle-aged donors, both of whom were living in households with similar gross incomes, the young donors were making gifts that were only about 18% of the value of middle-aged donors. And with the way that fundraising looks at...
Is that really surprising, though, given what we understand about the life cycle of a donor?
Well, if other factors are equal, it should be surprising. But then there are two other big factors that make this understandable. One is student debt, which is enormous, and the second is underemployment. So among young people, among households headed by someone under 40, where there is no student debt, the household net value is about $86,000, and with student debt, it's only about $8,000. So it's such a significant difference. And underemployment weighs heavily on young people. I mean, they're in there. Underemployment is more insidious than unemployment, actually. But there's good news on this side. And the good news is in about 5 years, the picture is going to be quite different, because when I look at the volume of people retiring and who are, the baby boom generation, are hanging into the workforce somewhat longer than the average age of retirement now is about 66, 67. And that's because boomers are trying to recover some of their lost investment value from the most recent recession. But time catches up with everybody, whether we like it or not. Right. And so boomers are retiring in greater numbers every year than we've seen before. And
are they
as a
staying
result,
donors? Are they continuing a focus on charitable works in retirement?
Yes, yes. They're not. That isn't stopping, and they're bringing their sort of middle-aged behavior patterns into their older years, which is changing the face, or is going to change the face of fundraising quite dramatically. And I'd say the number one issue there, or observation we have, is that middle-aged donors support about half the number of causes that older donors support. Now, I'm not talking about amount of money, just number of causes. A lot of that's right. A lot of the fundraising business is built on volume. So on the actually mistaken assumption that the more donors you have, the more money you will make, but that's in fact not true. And when a big chunk of the fundraising industry is in the direct marketing arena that depends on volume, they're in for a bit of shock it's already started, but it will become more dramatic over the next few years as middle-aged donors whose philosophy about giving is that if I support fewer causes, I can make more generous gifts to each cause that I do support, and that's a better way to give. And they're actually quite smart about that, because they know that it costs a charitable organization the same to get $100 out of them as it does to get $1,000 out of them. So if looking at net value of a gift, the net value of the larger gift gets more accomplished on the ground. So they have to make a choice somewhere. Now, many donors just give more money, which is great, and you can influence donors to give more generously than even they think they can give. But still, donors feel they're working within a budget, And so the majority now, or an increasing number, I should say, every year, has chosen to go the fewer causes, higher gift value route. Now, that's great for organizations with sophisticated, diversified fundraising operations and a robust major gifts program. But for organizations who are overly reliant on volume-based direct marketing or large-scale fundraising events that bring in a little money from a lot of people, they're going to need to diversify and to do it quickly because dramatic changes are on the way.
But, that's a message that in sort of fundraising conferences and fundraising circles has been tried to be pushed for several years. And I sort of feel that, charities that are not getting that message really need to listen to this particular Burk donor survey, because donors are speaking loudly through your survey that's a trend that we've seen, and you're saying that the speed of that engine is even growing. And I wonder, Penelope, if that sort of fewer charities, higher amounts also has a correlation to the dramatic growth of donor-advised funds, which allow people to sort of bank dollars, give to a charity when they want to, as opposed to necessarily responding to an urgent appeal or an appeal that comes in through the post. But it sounds to me that middle class is sort of defined the way that donors are giving for a period of time, and certainly an outgrowth of that has been the dramatic increase in the use of donor-advised funds.
Donor-advised funds and what's happening with giving overall has already had a dramatic impact, but it's going to get much bigger as time goes on. 17% of the donors in our study said that they didn't respond to any fundraising appeals whatsoever this year, and the majority of those donors said it's because they put their philanthropic budget into a donor-advised fund. So that's an area we're going to do more research on over the years, but that number is climbing exponentially. And as you hinted, donors are putting more and more money into those donor-advised funds, but the gifts are not necessarily coming out at the other end of the fund at the same rate. And so it is holding cash-based giving back from charitable organizations, and it's making donors harder to reach. So if a donor who's put their philanthropic...
Well, I was just going to say, but also giving donors the time to be thoughtful, careful planners in their philanthropy. And I think that is changing the dynamic of what it means to be a fundraiser, where it used to be campaign-based, it used to be time-based, give now, give to this campaign. And what you're showing is there's a percentage in your survey that are sort of impervious to that. And part of it is because they've already given a gift, they've already gotten their tax deduction, and now they can be more thoughtful in how they give. And as you know, I am CEO of a donor-advised fund, CAF America's donor-advised fund, which has grown 168% in the last 4 years. And I'll just make a note to our listeners that, to connect to a donor-advised fund seems complicated because you cannot solicit a donor-advised fund that has a lot of money. But the key is the same key that you've always had, and that is to build a relationship with donors that have a donor-advised fund. And one of the things that I've been promoting, which I'm hoping that fundraisers are starting to get the message from, is, are you asking your donors if they have a donor-advised fund? Are you showing yourself to be donor-advised fund savvy and friendly? Because the great thing about a donor-advised fund is the money is already given. All the donor has to do is advise it to you. So part of the work is already done for you. You don't have to sell them on the notion of giving. They've already done that. Now what you have to do is help convince them that you're the cause that they should advise the gift to.
That is such a critical observation. And to jump off that, and we see this in our research too, that donors in that situation are open to communication, less open to solicitation, but very open to information. So organizations that are very specific about why they're raising money, They engage in designated fundraising rather than undesignated or unrestricted. They never resolicit a donor until they have provided them with good information on what their last gift accomplished. And
that's right.
They're very astute at communications and marketing, because that's the way to reach donors.
And if you find out that you have a donor who has, if you've asked the question, you're a very smart, savvy 2016, 2017 fundraiser, and you have thought to ask, and you know that you have a donor who has given to you, who has an account at Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard or CAF America or a host of other donor-advised funds, you now can have a discussion with them, not about will they give, they already have, whether or not they will be philanthropic, they already are. The question is, and the donor now, and I think this ties into another theme that you've tracked, is the interest in communication, the interest in impact, and I think what we're seeing is a donor class now that is prepared and desirous of taking their time to be thoughtful, to ponder what they would like to accomplish, and then to connect and give to charities that are going to meet that demand, because they're not caught up in the decision of whether or not they're going to give. And in fact, they already know how much is in their donor advised fund, so they know how much they can give. The question is where.
So interesting. And if you look at donors with donor advised funds, and all donors, no matter how they're giving, in our survey this year, we found that 79% said they research or investigate causes before they give for the first time and before they give again. So they have become more serious, more determined, very strategic about their giving, and it's actually a good thing. We've run tests on donors who more passively just respond to an appeal without doing research, and donors who get an appeal, regardless of how it comes at them, whether it's electronic or print, and then say, oh, that's interesting, and then go to a not-for-profit's website to check them out further. And when you look at those two groups of donors who do their research on top of the alert that comes from a not-for-profit through an appeal, tend to follow through and give at a higher rate, and their gift values are more generous as well.
That's right. And of course, it's so much easier today for donors to do that research and be able to do it on their own and not necessarily have to rely on others because of the internet. So I think all of these topics and all these trends that we're talking about, they're not separate, and they don't run on separate tracks. The fact that donor-advised funds are growing, the fact that donors want more information, the fact that donors are doing more research, and the fact that, as you're saying, that sort of middle donor is giving to fewer charities but giving larger gifts, they're being more careful, they're being more strategic in their giving, and that, of course, goes back to the point that I'm making, is sort of the value of what is a donor-advised fund and why they're growing. Nobody has to give to a donor-advised fund. Nobody's out there forcing donors to give to donor-advised funds. It's because it meets a need that they have, and that they don't necessarily have the capacity to create a foundation where they can put money together and be thoughtful and strategic. It allows them to basically have a virtual foundation for themselves and their family, where now they can also have the benefit that so many very wealthy donors have had, to sit back and to be thoughtful and to be careful and possibly to bank money over time, because they would like to make a larger gift. They would like to be more impactful in their giving and not necessarily just be responsive to the last request that came in through their post box. We're going to take a quick break, Penelope, as you sort of ponder that. We're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we focus in on a topic that's very important to a lot of our listeners, and that is the topic of social media. And what are you learning from donors about the use of social media by nonprofits? And we'll be right back.
Have you ever wished you could take back an email you sent to the wrong person? Or have that nagging feeling that your confidential message was forwarded without your consent? Do you sometimes email sensitive data even though you know most email isn't secure? And we all have, because we're busy, and because in the world of email, there are no takebacks. Until now. Introducing Virtru, the simple way to send and receive secure email with confidence. Virtru is easy to install and use, and it works with your favorite email programs like Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, MacMail, and more. When you hit the Send Secure button, your email is encrypted before it leaves your computer or smartphone. And even better, you can revoke a message at any time. You decide whether a message can be forwarded by recipients. You can track where your message is forwarded, and more. Download Virtru today and start sharing with confidence, because everyone deserves.
Remember, our podcasts and archives are always available 24 hours a day at tedhart.com. Click on radio links. If you're listening live today, the phone lines are open. Call in and ask a question by dialing 347-324-3080. Now, back to the Nonprofit Coach with Ted Hart.
And grab your calendars. I want to make sure that you mark on your calendar the last 2 shows of this calendar year here on the Nonprofit Coach. We will be back live on December 13th with Rob Mitchell, who is going to be sharing us the latest information on the Atlas of Giving and, of course, his projection of what giving is going to look like in 2017. Then we round out, as we always do. Our producer always makes sure that one of our most popular guests here on the Nonprofit Coach winds up every year with our holiday show on December 20th. And, of course, who else could that be but the wonderful Kay Sprinkle Grace, who will be back here, as she always is, to round out our calendar year. We're back here now live with Penelope Burk. Our topic today is the 2016 Burk Donor Survey. Before we went on the break, Penelope, I brought up this issue of social media. It's so important. We've seen its utilization, political campaigns, fundraising campaigns. What do donors think about nonprofits' use of social media?
So I'll say first that we did social media research the first time in 2011. So now 5 years later, we've gone back to the same questions, asked them again, and there's some big differences. So 5 years ago, only 43% of our respondents who had one or more social media accounts followed any not-for-profits, and today, 80%. So it's a massive jump, and good kudos to charitable organizations who have made their social media presence known with their donors. So that's really terrific. Some things have moved way ahead, others have not. So when we ask donors this year what inspires them to follow a not-for-profit on social media, way out in front, ahead of any other response, 66% said they post relevant updates on their work. And by relevant, donors mean that their not-for-profits are accountable. They're talking specifically about programs, services, projects that they run, not just about the organization as a whole. They're describing how they do their work, what has changed in the last year or whatever space of time, and how donors have made a difference, how donors have partnered with them to make their work bigger, better, more modernized, whatever the case may be. So that's number one. Number two, at 45%, is that social media allows donors to see images of what organizations that they follow are doing. So, of course, if you set out rules for yourself with social media, certainly one of the platforms you need to be active on must be an image-based platform, because this is really, really big for donors. They also want to know, what's coming up. So donors go to social media to see what charitable organizations have in the way of upcoming events. And there's some cautionary information, too. When we asked, well, why would you follow one not-for-profit that you give to but not another? And they say, well, we prefer to follow not-for-profits that don't over-communicate, which is really fascinating. And that
so you really can overdo it, but what does that mean? You have us all on the edge of our seat because, of course, every nonprofit now wants to know what's too much.
Well, this is maybe our biggest area of research because it has the most significant implications for fundraising success. So this, what I'm going to say now applies to social media, but it applies to all forms of communication. Because it is so quick and so relatively inexpensive to communicate electronically, and because donors admit that they prefer electronic to print communication in most circumstances, we've found that over-communication has usurped over-solicitation as the number one irritation for donors that cause them to stop giving. And so, of course, I'm always asked, well, how many times should we contact a donor? What's appropriate? What's too many? What's too few? And the answer from donors is that when you have something meaningful to say, we want to hear it, and we want to hear it right away. And social media has that added advantage of immediacy, quick sound bites of information that can be transmitted very quickly. But donors also say that if you're telling me the same thing over and over again, then I'm not interested. And they blank out quite quickly if they're being asked to pay attention to something they already knew because you communicated it yesterday or earlier today or last week. We're seeing that right now, of course. Anybody with any kind of account who has mistakenly given over their email address to a retail store are being bombarded several times a day with information on what they should be buying. And you just turn off. As soon as you see the name of the company, you just delete it. So what we're finding through the research we do with individual clients is that when we do this national research study, but we also will contract with an individual client to survey their donors. And our clients who communicate and solicit prolifically get very low response rates on our survey if the request to participate comes from the client. And as soon as the request comes from my company, the response rate goes up. Now, that's the opposite of what should happen, because people should be more eager to communicate with the charity they support than with a third-party research company like mine. But it's an indicator that over-communication is simply blocking what you're trying to transmit completely from the donor. So we may have very large numbers of email addresses and social media accounts, and we're sending out information, but that doesn't mean donors are receiving it. It's getting blocked by their own server. It's getting dumped by the donor before it's being read, and sometimes it's not even getting getting to the server. So it's having a big negative impact. In the testing that we're doing now on what communications work most effectively, it's all about quality. If you have something important to say, and you can say it initially in 15 words or less with a link to your website, that is your number one advantage to communicating in a world where everyone is being bombarded by communication from all fronts. So, and without getting your message heard, you can't inspire donors to give for the first time or give again. And so, calming down on volume of communication.
Really be thoughtful. You need to be thoughtful and have a plan rather than just in a habit of sending out everything that you can think of, hoping that something will stick.
Yes, and taking a different tact, not how can I communicate with my donors today, but should I communicate with my donors today, or should I just leave them alone? Right. People need time to think, and if the communication you had sent before was powerful, exciting, concise, fascinating, then it will stay in donors' minds. and given time to think about it, you've already equipped those donors with what they need to know when you get around to asking them to give again.
Well, and one of the things that we've shared many times here on this show, Penelope, is the difference between fundraising and inspiring action. And that in today's social media world, it's less about making the ask and more about inspiring action both on that donor. But in the social media world, will your message get shared? Will it get posted? Will other people see it who are not on your list? And that takes a skill of inspiring action as opposed to just asking one person for a gift.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Now, these numbers are still small, but when we asked our respondents who follow at least one cause how following influences giving to that same organization, 17% this year said they now give more often because they follow a cause on social media, and 8% make larger gifts. Now, those numbers are small, but 5 years ago, those numbers were 9% and 1%, respectively. So there's been significant growth in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and it does make a difference in terms of how you communicate, and again, inspiring that action. So somebody who's following you, someone who is responding in that way, clearly has been inspired to do so because they're not required to, and there's nothing to do. And I think that's a very different skill than getting someone to give you their email address and then bombarding them with email.
Mm-hmm. 60% of our respondents who follow said they endorse charitable organizations that they believe in on their to their own followers, which is really critical. And within the group of followers, there is this relatively small number, about 18%, who are mass influencers. So, and you can easily recognize them, and they can be very helpful to you in your fundraising efforts. They're the people who retweet everything you tweet. They're the people with very large groups of followers. They're very active. They want to know what you're doing. They'll attend an event. They'll offer to volunteer. They'll contact you without being asked to find out more about what you're accomplishing with the work that you do, because they are actively communicating that out to their network. So if you look at these mass influencers in the same way that in fundraising we look at major gift donors, who are small in number but hugely, hugely influential on the bottom line.
Very influential.
It's the same thing in social media.
Because other people listen to them, other people follow them. Listen, Penelope, unfortunately our time together is always so short. We could do several shows with you. You're always so fascinating. Your research is so important. We've only got about 2 minutes left. I wanted to ask you to do two things. One is you're currently accepting partners, I believe, for the 2017 study. So how can people get involved with that, and how can my listeners reach you?
They to sign up as a partner for next year, go to our website, which is cygresearch.com. And right off the home page, there's a quick link to two things. One, information for partners to see if you qualify. And we're busy accruing partners right now for our 2017 survey that will start in February. And second, if you want to know more about what we found, you can download the executive summary of each research study from 2009 to 2016, or you can buy the whole thing if you want. So I'll end with maybe one of our best statistics of all. Every year we ask every donor in the second to last question of each research study, last year, did you give all that you could, or did you leave money on the table? Did you hold your philanthropy back? And this year, 31% of donors said, they could have given more, and they held their philanthropy back. And then when we looked at the youngest donors in the survey, it was even better. 55% of donors under the age of 35 said they could have given more last year. That's where you should be concentrating your effort for all the success that that fundraisers have in raising billions of dollars every year. there's still a lot more money out there.
Penelope, thank you. Unfortunately, I do have to end the show. Hope for the future. Thank you so much. There's more money on the table, and more importantly, Penelope Burk will be back to share next year's research, so become part of that. Thank you for joining us here on the Nonprofit Coach.
Thanks, Ted. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the Nonprofit Coach Radio Show with Ted Hart. Tell all your friends to check out our production schedule and download our iPod and iPad-friendly podcast at tedhart.com. Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Coach.
When it comes to cleaning your house, who doesn't wish un galán with a trust fund swept in and passed the mop to your evil stepmom like in the telenovelas? Hola, it's Chiquis here, and although life isn't always like in the soap operas, Fabuloso does bring a clean that's always over the top. Get your home dramatically clean anytime you like, without any evil mama drama. Just long-lasting lavender freshness. That's Fabuloso, taking the drama out of any mess.
Fabuloso's 2 times concentrated formula provides 2 times more active ingredients versus non-concentrated Fabuloso Original. Use as directed.
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.